What's up, everyone? So today we have a question from Egu10 who says, did digital forensics play a role in evidence collection after you were arrested? Did you have any plan or methods to evade digital forensics in the event of being raided? So in the event of being raided, I did have contingency plans, but they weren't centered around data destruction. So everything was encrypted anyways. Vast majority of the time I used Tails. So I really didn't, that having pulling out the flash drive and hitting it with a hammer or throwing it in the microwave, would have sufficed. And like that would have been it. Like I thought about, kind of like if you read Stealing the Network, or How to Own a Shadow, or the Stealing the Network series, they talk about like, setting up thermite with, like a mercury switch, making, thermite, which like melts steel like butter. That was definitely a consideration, that I mulled over because it's relatively easy to get rust and aluminum. Like those kind of things like I considered, but at the end of the day, it's kind of over the top. And what I had agreed with, like with my cousin, I had said, listen, like if we get raided at the end of the day, since I organize all the security and I take care of, I oversee, basically everything. If we get raided, then most likely it's my fault that we're getting raided. So if that happens, to do damage control, I'll admit to my part. Because I mean, if they're raiding me, they know something. They're gonna find drugs. So, at the end of the day, it is what it is. If that happens, you're hit. So from that point, I wanted to be able to at least control who that would affect. And what I said to her was, listen, if we get raided, what'll happen is I'll say everything's mine and, that I'm a darknet vendor. And that's literally exactly what I did. After they came in, I was drinking my coffee and it's like 6:37 in the morning and I heard a knock on the door. So I went, to go answer the door. So in that area where I lived, it's a very rural area. And for the last 3.5 years living there, it's I showed a picture of it in another video, but like you guys look it up, it's like 3582 Darling Hill Road. It's a red house, 2-car garage, and beautiful view. But the only people that like ever knocked on my door were Jehovah's Witnesses. And I would have fun, kind of trolling them and debating with them. So, I assumed it was the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? So it's, 7 in the morning. I'm like, I just got up, so I'm out of it. So I got my coffee in my hand and like, I have mason jars. So like, it's fitting, right? So I go over and I open up the door and, there's a guy standing there. And he's got like this, I'd never seen it before. It's like this vest, but like on his vest, it says, I think it said, Department of Homeland Security, but, on his vest, he had a badge, but like the badge, it was like sewn, it wasn't like a metal badge. It was like a sewn yellow badge. I remember that caught my eye. I just thought it was really weird. They looked at his badge. I looked at him. And he's like, I'm with the Department of Homeland Security. And we have a federal search warrant. And like I'm looking at him and then like I look at the people in back of him and it's like 25 people behind him, the MP5s. And this is before COVID. They had like these masks on with skulls and they think they're in Iraq. And, I'm like, all right, man. I was like, yeah, I guess you want to come in then, and he's like, yeah, that'd be good, So like, I'm still half asleep, so I step back, because they show me the warrant. So I step back, he walks in, and I'm like, I don't want them, acting all crazy. Like I got my 3 kids in the house. My ex, who's a nightmare, lived, I lived with her at the time. And then my cousin. So I was like, listen, there's 2 females in the house and 3 children, I'm the only adult male here, because I don't want them, thinking they're in Call of Duty. So, they go through, they clear the house and like, as they're doing that, like the guy comes back and he's like, oh, I'm from this, some special task force out of Philadelphia. And this other guy was a darknet specialist from New York. And But I'm like, whatever, man. And so they're like, oh, like, are there any drugs? I was like, yeah, they're in my safe. They're locked up there. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a darknet vendor and blah, blah, blah. And like, you know, that was the agreement that I made with her. And for me, like, keeping my word's a big thing, you know? I know there's a ton of people who would be like, oh, you're a moron for that. And, you know, you shouldn't ever say anything to the cops. Like, I'm well aware of my rights, right? Like, I'm a paralegal now, but like, I was very conscious of what my rights were previous to that. It was just, that was the plan. That was the contingency plan. And like, when you do your OpSec and you lay out, you know, information security policies and incident response policies, follow them. You know, like, you don't, like, when these things happen and you've made contingency plans for this, you follow the plan that you had laid out. You know, that was the purpose of the plan. So I think, you know, that said, that's what I did. You know, that was the agreement that we made, and I stuck to my word, and I went to eat that. And you know, I ate the charge to try to control it from touching her. And they ended up charging her with, you know, conspiracy anyways. Not like that day, but it was like months later. I had my first hearing. And what happened was, like, I had moved since then. My ex still lives in the same house, but I had moved since then. And the feds didn't know my new address. Like, I wasn't on probation or anything. I had no need to update them, so I didn't. So I'm living in the town over, and like, I had a court date. I knew I had a court date, so I left. I went to my court date, which is like an hour and a half away. So what ended up happening that day was the Department of Homeland Security showed up to my old address because they wanted to arrest me. They wanted to cuff me, bring me into the courtroom, you know, cuffed up, like, oh yeah, we got him. You know what I mean? Like, and I was already on my way to Burlington, to the federal courthouse, specifically to the U.S. Marshal's office, to turn myself in, because like, my court date was for that. It was for a self-surrender. So like, I go there, and my lawyer's like, oh, you know, I get to the courthouse, and she's like, oh, we got to go to the U.S. Marshals. And I was like, well, she's like, yeah, you got to turn yourself in. Then you have your arraignment. And then, you know, it goes on from there. And like, you know, when I went, they, you know, like, cuffed me, all that stuff, searched me, all that stuff. And they put me in a holding cell. And that's when I was in there for a couple hours. Then I heard my cousin's voice. Like, she was the one who given me the ride there. And they ended up arresting her, and they charged her with conspiracy. For all I know, like, that, all of that was a setup, you know, because she ended up telling on me anyways. So, you know, she acted outraged that they arrested her. Like I had put her in that position for her to be arrested. It was my fault. And it turned out, after reading, you know, the evidence, that it wasn't my fault. It was actually her fault, because of her complacency. But, and again, like, I'll accept responsibility for not, you know, watching her. But, so, you know, I guess it was a mix. But yeah, so as far as like data destruction, like, it really wasn't needed because everything was encrypted anyways. And at the end of the day, I would have just, you know, I would have pulled the flash drive out of the laptop, you know, like, if it was, you know, if it was more involved, like, you know, I wasn't selling millions of dollars worth of product. Right. So, and my OpSec was so tight that I never could foresee me having an issue to begin with. And I'd like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But, you know, at the end of the day, my point of my OpSec when I set it up was to make law enforcement have to break the law in order to catch me. And I was successful in that. It just didn't matter because the feds are the feds, and like, they have a 99%, you know, conviction rate for a reason. Like, they're not, you know, they are literally willing to do whatever it takes to, you know, get you locked up. And I think part of that is because they almost look at it like a game, you know what I mean? And when you don't look at it like a job, but you look at it like a game, then sometimes you're willing to cheat in order to win. And unfortunately, that's just kind of the way it is. And that's exactly what ended up happening. And, you know, it is what it is. So to answer your question, like, yeah, like, at the end of the day, if it's something like you're really worried about, I think one of the best books I read on this topic was the Stealing the Network series, where the guy, like, he has all these triggers that are set inside of a Faraday cage room that he makes, where he's got, thermite set with a mercury switch that's, ready to go off and melt, turn the hard drives into slag, instantly. And like, I mean, you could go that route, I think it's a bit extreme. But I hope that answered your question, and I'll see you guys in the next video.